days until we hit $20,000. We've got a generous donor who's going to match your donation. So every dollar you donate is worth $2 to us. So anything you can give over the next 72 hours is going to make a huge difference. So thanks very much. What I want to show you now is a great little video that we made last year that showcases a really, frankly, under scrutinised or an issue that just doesn't get enough public attention, and that's the plight of little creatures like gliders. So in New South Wales, we have a crisis going on when it comes to land clearing, both on public and private land. On public land alone, every 5.5 minutes in New South Wales, we lose a football field's worth of native bush. That's not land clearing that's happening on farms or on other private property. That is happening in our state parks, in our own public lands, because of the logging practices that go on in New South Wales still to this day. Gliders need to have those big old growth trees so that they can get the hollows they need to live in. And what we've been trying to do is draw attention to that issue and ultimately get an end to native logging in those public parks in particular, but really across the board. We need to stop clearing the Australian native bush and we need to go 100% to plantations. We're almost there. We've got 91% plantations at the moment. We'd like to get that to 100% by 2030. Really important for biodiversity, really important for climate. So without too much further ado, have a look at this great video from earlier in the year about gliders.
And tonight we're out in the forest after dark to see some amazing animals that live in the nighttime.
We're out here tonight looking for one of Australia's very cute and cuddly animals, but many of you have probably never heard of it.
A bit like koalas, they're like flying koalas.
All it eats is eucalypt leaves.
They're completely nocturnal.
The body the size of a cat and a tail even longer.
So it's the largest gliding marsupial.
They can glide up to 100 metres through the forest between the trees.
It comes in various colour forms, from jet black right through to completely white, and then mixtures in between.
2 super big fluffy ears.
It's like Australia's version of the panda.
A weird gremlin monkey-like face, a huge fluffy body and a long tail.
So one of Australia's most iconic animals is known to almost nobody. It's an animal called the greater glider.
They're a really unique Australian native animal and they're an indicator of a healthy ecosystem.
Look, I feel really lucky to have been out here tonight, having the opportunity to see creatures that most Australians would not have seen and are even less likely to see going into the future.
Many, many years ago, when I was first working in forests back in the early 1980s, it was the most common animal that you would see everywhere when you went spotlighting. You would see dozens and dozens of animals in a given night. In some places, such as in northeastern Victoria, it's now extremely difficult to find this animal. Populations have declined dramatically. It's trying to work out why is it that populations are declining so quickly and what can we do to make sure that it doesn't join this long list of threatened and endangered, in fact, extinct Australian species.
Greater gliders need hollows to stay in them during the day and also to raise their young.
Now, almost all of the different species of possums and gliders are dependent on these very large old trees that have large hollows.
They love this habitat because it's full of different eucalyptus species that they can forage on, and there's also a bounty of hollows.
They also use multiple hollows and swap regularly between those different hollow trees.
The animals that live here are dependent upon a stable ecosystem, and they're dependent upon the relationship between old trees and the whole forest.
So these old growth trees have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they've formed not just one, not just two, but sometimes dozens and dozens of hollows in the one single tree. So the greater glider is an animal that lives completely in the canopy. So us scientists have to come up with some unique ways of getting up there to study them. They never come down to the ground if they can help it, and instead, during the day, they live in these hollows. And these hollows are so important. But unfortunately, habitat loss means that we're losing our old growth trees, and they're full of these amazing hollows that the gliders call home. So I'm going to have a look inside of one and see if anybody is home. So in here we have 2 greater gliders living inside their hollow, and hollows can take up to 200 years to form. Sorry, little guy. So the 2 greater gliders we studied today were both adults, and they were both in excellent health condition. And they were using a hollow that managed to survive the 2019-2020 bushfires. A lot of hollows can be lost following fires. So if fires are too frequent, we can lose these hollow-bearing trees.
Now, in many of these forests, what's happening is that populations of hollow trees are declining. We're losing those trees through lightning strikes, through logging, land clearing, repeated wildfires, so that essential tree hollow resource is declining, and with that there's also a decline in populations of animals like greater gliders.
So when forests are disturbed from fire or logging, it can change the composition of the trees that grow in those forests. And some of the trees that grow back are especially adapted to that disturbance, but they're not always good food.
When habitats are disturbed like that, animals don't move, they actually simply perish.
It's really important that gliders have connected habitat all through their populations across the state for them to be able to survive.
So this animal is really a signal species of just how much disturbance is occurring and why it's so detrimental to populations of these animals and others.
We strongly encourage the government to implement controls that will protect habitat for koalas and for gliders.
Over the past 200 years, we've unfortunately lost 40% of our forests in Australia. And this means that we've lost so much wildlife, so many mammals to this deforestation.
Greater gliders are a vulnerable and threatened species under federal environmental law.
If we lose these trees and these important parcels of habitat, we lose the greater glider. So it's really important to conserve what we have left.
However, state-based forestry operations are exempt from those federal environmental laws, which allows them to log the home and the habitat of the animals that have existed here and continue to exist here despite the horrible fires of 2020. The state government has a call to make now. Does it choose to protect gliders, or does it continue to allow logging?
There's more and more evidence that the logging of native forests is unsustainable both economically and environmentally. And for that reason, we think that the more pressure that ordinary Australians can put on the government to stop the logging of native forest and replace it with plantation growing, the better it will be for animals like the greater glider.
Gliders need hollows. End native forest logging now.